you know, the thing about that 1% is that that's happened in every society that's ever been studied. It doesn't really matter what the governmental system is, and it certainly happened under the Soviets, that's for sure. And there was a lot of people who had enough zero so they just died. So, you know, the utopian dream was completely unimplementable for a variety of very complex reasons. One is that it's very hard to fight against that distribution pattern when people are trading, because mere statistics will do that. And then there's other things that, and I should tell you as well that the Pareto distribution governs a lot of things. So like if you look at books, if I remember properly, last year there was something like 1 million English language books published, and I think 500 of them sold more than 100,000 copies, which is none, right? That's none. And of that 500, you can be sure that one of them was by Stephen King, and he took half the money, because there's like 5 authors in the English language who are on every airport paperback stand, occupying the top rung, and that's massive real estate, right? Because it's replicated everywhere. And because they're so prominent, and because they're known names, when people are in a hurry and they just want something to read, they just grab that, and then more money goes to those people. And so, you know, success breeds success, and failure breeds failure, and it's not necessarily linear. And that's a really difficult thing to deal with. And it's hard on societies, because one of the things we do know is that, you know, as you stretch out the inequality, you make men, particularly on the lower end of the distribution, more and more likely to be aggressive. It's sort of like, you imagine every man has a threshold for violence, and status is important to men. Not that it's not important to women, but it's a different kind of status. Status is important to men because it's one of the things that makes them marketable as partners to women. So it actually turns out to be quite important to men. The men tend to compete with one another for status, hierarchy position. And in a really unequal society, if you're like a low rung guy, then, and you don't have any opportunity to rise because the society isn't structured so that there's mobility, then the more aggressive guys tend to turn to criminality. And you know, and so you could say there's a threshold for criminality, and the more inequality pressure you put on a particular area, geographic or political area, the more inequality pressure you put on it, the more men slip past that threshold and into criminality. And you know, there's been pretty good studies done of drug gang in Chicago. That was the best one. A sociologist actually went and hung out with a drug gang he got into it. I guess the drug gang leader was, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily narcissistic, but that might be a reasonable way of thinking about it. And he was kind of happy with the idea of maybe being the subject of a book. And so this guy was able to associate with them, got to know them quite well. And then the housing project in which the gang was housed was slated for demolition, and the gang broke up. And he got the books, because they kept books. And what he found was the average street drug dealer, first of all, was employed in another job as well, and was making far less than minimum wage. Now, but the guys, you know, further up the chain, of course, followed the Pareto distribution, and so there was a tiny minority of them who were raking in a tremendous amount of loot, and the guys at the bottom were just waiting around for the possibility that they could rise up the hierarchy. And you know, it's a pretty violent game, so the chances that someone's going to be taken out is pretty high, and then a little slot opens up for some opportunistic second rater, and perhaps he can move up the hierarchy. So the Pareto distribution governs all sorts of other things too. I mentioned it governs the popularity of books, the sales of books, but it also characterizes the distribution of everything that people produce. So if you think of creative production of any sort, artistic production, industrial production, it doesn't matter. almost everything fails, and a few things succeed beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Apple's a good example of that. I mean, the iPhone, they have their competitors, but it's an extraordinarily dominant product, and they rake in billions of dollars. I don't know if Apple is valued at $1 trillion, but it's close to that, and that's a lot of money. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's something like this. I probably have the figures wrong, but like the top 40 people, the richest 40 people in the world have as much money as the bottom 2 billion. Right? Now, it's not like they're stuffing their mattresses with that money, or they have a skyscraper full of cash. That money is out in the economy doing whatever money does. So, you can't spend $28 billion. So, and sometimes you can even do some good with it. Bill Gates seems to be doing something reasonable with his money. But the reason I'm telling you this is because one of the things you should know is that this proclivity for inequality is pervasive among the creative products of human beings. It's the case with goals scored in hockey. My son told me, and he's a reliable source on hockey statistics, that if you don't count any of the points that Wayne Gretzky managed with scoring, he still had enough points just with assists to have more points than any hockey player that ever played. So, even at the upper end of the distribution, there's some person who's, they're so good at what they do, and then there's another person that's so much better than them that it's not even comparable. And so, and the benefits flow to people who are in that position. And you can understand why, I would say, because, let's say you start writing and you get a book, and rare things, very rare things to have happen, and then some people read it and they like it, and then of course it's much more likely that you'll get a next book, and if people like that, well, it's even more likely that you'll get a third book, and then people start to know who you are, and then because they know who you are, they phone you up and offer you opportunities, and your network grows, and it's like this exponential increase in your reach and your capacity for production, and more flows to you. And then on the other hand, if you start to fail, and why would someone fail? Well, God, one idea that's very common in our culture is that poverty is caused by lack of money, and that's a really stupid idea, because money is very difficult to handle. I had clients who were, drug addicts, and the worst possible thing that could happen to them was that they got some money. They're just done. First of all, they were hanging around with people who were a little on the sociopathic side, and so, especially if they weren't that bright and couldn't defend themselves very well, as soon as they got money, well, it was off to the bar with all the friends. And one guy I remember in particular, every time he got his disability check, he was gone for 5 days. You usually found him in a ditch, because he'd just go to the bar, spend every cent he had on alcohol and cocaine, and wake up in a ditch, 3/4 dead, eventually completely dead. And then he was ashamed and horrified and repentant, and he'd straighten himself out again, and then that was all well and good until, as long as he was broke, until the next check showed up, and then bang, the same thing. So, it's not like money is necessarily a good for everyone. It's hard to manage money. It's really easy for it to disappear. I mean, elderly people have a hell of a time now because, crooks are contacting them on the internet non-stop, and so just giving people money's like, it's like pouring water in their hands. It's not that helpful, not necessarily that helpful. And then, of course, contributors to poverty are, well, it's not so good to have a low IQ. People don't like the idea of IQ because it seems so arbitrary. You have a high IQ. Well, it's not like you deserve it exactly. You're set up that way pretty much right from the beginning. It's very, 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 very stable. You can make a high IQ person stupider by, not educating them up to the level of their possibility, but taking someone who has a low IQ and trying to raise that, it's like, if you can figure out how to do that, well, it's Nobel Prize time for you.